water extraction levels in soils on these different crops, and they're all very similar. And we can look at a normal extraction as an upside down triangle, virtually. If you were to look at the first quarter of the root zone, and the second quarter of the root zone, and the third quarter of the root zone, and the fourth quarter of the root zone, this would be about 40%, 30%, 20%, and 10% of the extraction of water by the roots. So this would be the total depth of the root zone here. So if you had a crop that rooted 4 feet deep in the top foot, 40% of the moisture extracted by that plant would happen in the top foot. 30% would happen in the second foot. The third foot would be 20%, the fourth foot would be 10%. If this was a 2-foot rooted depth crop, like most vegetables are, the top 6 inches, 40% of the water the plant used would come from the top 6 inches. 30% from the second 6 inches, 20% from the third 6 inches, and 10% from the fourth 6 inches of the crop. So in all of those other crops that we've talked about, we're looking at extractions approximately like this. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that we want to make sure we monitor what's happening on the top half of the root zone, because that's where the major activity is occurring. That's why we always want to work in that readily available moisture band, and in general we're not taking much water out of the lower half of the root zone profile. So when we're doing soil moisture monitoring, we want to monitor at these critical points. A quarter of the way down in the root zone, a half of the way down in the root zone. Those are really the really critical spots to know. If you're going to put in 2 tensiometers, for example, those would be the 2 most likely candidates for spots to put them. Now ideally you want to measure all the way down the full depth of your root zone so that you can monitor deep percolation. We have a tendency to overwater instead of underwater, and so when we are looking at actual moisture levels, we want to measure clear down to the bottom of the root zone. Now what's going to happen to the moisture down here at this point? If I have, for example, a tensiometer or a gypsum block or a ceramic block buried in the ground at this point, are we going to have very much activity on that? That thing better stay pretty stable, shouldn't it? It better stay right at just under field capacity, and we don't want it to wiggle from there. We don't want it to get up into saturation. That means we're getting deep percolation. We don't want it to dry out. That means that we're starting to consume the too much moisture in the upper part of the root zone, because now we're starting to get capillarity pulling the moisture out of it upward, as well as some of that water being pulled out by the roots. Now when that plant starts to go into stress and it uses up all the water in the first quarter of its root zone and the second quarter of its root zone, then it has to rely on this lower part of the root zone to pull its moisture. But by then we've gone below that readily available water and we're starting to get ourselves into some stress. So our effective root zone, again, even though plants root deeper, the action's happening on the top half of the root zone profile. And that's where we really need to monitor what's happening. Now this is somewhat not true in turf, because it's hard, well, I shouldn't say that, it probably holds similarly in truth with turf, but our root zone all of a sudden has shrunk down to 6 inches. To monitor at the 1 inch, the 2 inch, the 3 inch, the 4 inch levels, very hard to disseminate, because the changes happen so rapidly. During a hot day, you're getting a tremendous speed of activity of water transfer in that profile. The plant sucks it out of that top quarter and the second quarter, and it's transpiring it into the air. Those values start dropping relatively fast. And as that is occurring, obviously we're getting a continuous shift in the moisture in that root zone. Now it's still pulling, this is percentages, this isn't what's stored in the root zone, this is how much is pulled from those levels. That's why oftentimes we have to come back later in the day where we have a really shallow rooted grass and it's root zone like a golf green with a 4-inch root zone. Boy, by the time 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon comes along, it's consumed all of this, and it's putting itself into some serious stress. So we have to come back and water it twice that day, once at night and then once in the middle of the afternoon, to recover it from that shock. Because as this moisture gets used up in this upper surface, then the soil temperature starts to build. It starts to get really hot, and then we put that plant into jeopardy. So we can't let it get too hot up in that area. As long as we have really good transpiration occurring, we're releasing enough moisture into the air to create a cooling effect on the surface. And you can test that any given hot day. If you've ever been out and sat down on the lawn on a really hot day, you always notice how cool the lawn feels. Well, that's because all that transpiration has occurred at the surface, and effectively it's evaporative cooling taking place right on the surface of the ground, and it's actually keeping that canopy cool, much cooler than the air temperature.
So it's actually like a human body sweating pretty much.
Exactly. Transpiration in a plant is exactly like perspiration in your eye. Yes, that's absolutely right.
I'm sure